Good evening, everyone. Hello and welcome to Art Laboratory Berlin. My name is Regina Rapp, and we have here Chris de Lutz, and there's also Tuce Ere. We're very happy to welcome you to an event tonight, an online talk with dear artist Mary Maggic. And this is happening in the series of Permeable Bodies, our series of talks, workshops, and performances and podcasts this year. This event tonight happens as one of many artistic and feminist explorations of embodiment and identity in flux, as well as an investigation of our interconnection and interaction with the environment around us. So we've had so far reading groups and talks and workshops, and it's our big pleasure to welcome you, Mary Maggic. In a way, this week we have the great luxury to have Mary with us for the series twice. So we have an online talk tonight. That's what we planned for the international community, near and far. And I know we have an audience very far tonight. And this Sunday, we're gonna have a workshop, Sticking with the Trouble, where Mary Maggic will join us in Berlin for an on-site workshop. But tonight, I want to welcome you to a lecture with the title Performing the Sublime Sea of Co-Mattering. And it has been really a great pleasure in the last 2 years to work together with Mary in exhibitions, conferences, workshops, talks. I think, Mary, we have been sharing a very big discussion ongoing, I think, since 2016 and 17. And we are very glad to continue that conversation with a new perspective, quite troublesome year, and also post-pandemic perspective. And before I hand over to you, Mary, let me just briefly introduce you to our dear audience. So Mary Maggic, born in 1991 in Los Angeles, is a Vienna-based non-binary Chinese-American artist and researcher working on the fuzzy intersections of body and gender politics and capitalist ecological alienations. Maggic frequently deploys biohacking as a xeno-feminist practice of care that serves to demystify invisible lines of molecular biopower to demystify. They are currently a member of the online network Hackteria, Open Source Biological Art, the lab theater collective Aliens in Green, the Asian feminist collective Myling Vienna, and the radical curriculum project Pirate Care and the online cyberfeminism index. So I think, dear audience, I think you know what a pleasure and enrichment the next 1 or 2 hours will be. As I said, Mary, welcome again to the, I don't know how many time here at Art Laboratory Berlin. Thank you so much to be with us twice this week, tonight, virtually with us. And thank you for taking time, Mary.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation. So I suggest we just dive right into it because I have a lot to talk about. So I will just share my screen. All right. So we are all living in the astral world. So I always start on this slide. Let's see. Okay. Is it all right if this is on the side of the screen? Okay.
Everything
I
looks
will leave it
perfect.
alone. Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, it's
All right.
moving globe. Everything is perfect.
Because I just see like the Zoom stuff on the side, but I think that's fine, right?
I think it looks perfect. It's
Okay.
you and your slides.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So I always start on this slide because I want to talk about how biohacking revealed the astral world to me, but it also allowed me to find a way out of the astral world, or a way to be within the astral world. But first, what is the astral world? So this is actually a term that I came up with because I needed a word to describe this double trauma that we're living in. So what do I mean by this double trauma? So the first trauma comes when we are inundated with all of these pervasive toxicities, and it's a super alienating phenomenon, right? Because everything we know to be normal and natural is actually not true. It's actually totally altering all the time or mutating all the time. So that's the first trauma, living with toxicities. Then the second trauma comes when we're actually unable to strategize and to collectivize because of these binary and eco-heteronormative structures, structures of purity that we're basically locked into. And a lot of it's ideological, and a lot of it's based on, social upbringing or social conditioning and things like that. But it's paralyzing. It's paralyzing us, and it's causing us to decollectivize. So in this talk, I'm going to go through 3 chapters where I'm describing how biohacking produces this existential knowing about our bodies and about our environments. And from this existential knowing, we can start to create new ways of being and becoming in this very toxic world. And I just want to note or preface that these strategies are not about cleaning up, and they're not about returning to some kind of pure form of nature, but they're actually using the alienation itself to find a way out. So part 1 of the talk, an existential knowing. So I really love this quote by Ian Hacking in his book, Representing and Intervening. He writes, "We did not find sex hormones somewhere in the lost corner, like a desert island lost in the mist. We ourselves called sex hormones into existence." So back in 2015, I started a project called Open Source Estrogen, and it's kind of evolved. It's taken on many forms actually, but it started out as a purely biohacking kind of project. But when I first started it, one of the first things I did was I typed in the word estrogen into Google image search. So right here, this is actually a screenshot of all the results that I got. And as you can see, there's all kinds of signifiers of femininity. Like there's larger breast size, smoother skin, and there's also lots of pharmaceutical products like hormone replacement therapy or contraceptives. So for me, this collection of images actually is a really great summary of what the public's relationship with hormones is, which is primarily mediated through the pharmaceutical industry. And a lot of it's also based on consumerism and these pills, right? Selling these pills. And if you think about pills, so I'm coming to this from the perspective of a biohacker, right? So, and biohackers are all about opening the black box. And if you think about the pill is like the ultimate black box because you just take it, you put it in your body, and it does something to your body, and you have no idea how it works. And if you think about deconstructing a pill, how would you even go about opening the black box of a pill? So, pushing that analogy further, I started to think, well, how is gender also a black box? Because what's happened here is that these molecules have been given a gender. So estrogen codes for femininity and testosterone codes for masculinity. But how did we come to this black box that we don't question anymore? We don't open this box anymore. We just kind of believe that this is the gender that's assigned to the hormones. So throughout this talk, I want us to think about hacking not only a material practice, but also hacking as literally hacking the symbolic representations of that material. And then as I got further along in my research in open source estrogen, I realized that there's already so many hormones around us in the form of environmental toxicity. So there are natural hormones that we produce in our bodies, and this is for just the normal functioning of the body. But because of all the residues of industrial capitalism, we now have all of these molecules that mimic hormones. So basically, they can actually bind to the same receptors that are responsible for hormones, for example, the estrogen receptor. So I'm labeling this as a kind of molecular colonization. And I'm using the word colonization because I want to pose the question of, well, then how do we decolonize our bodies, our environments, and the planetary? So just zooming in to what's happening at the molecular level, this is the green molecule there. That's a representation of the estrogen receptor. And the really interesting thing about this receptor is that scientists say that it is highly promiscuous. And I always think this is a funny way to describe a receptor, but what they mean is that it's basically a lock that has many keys that can go inside. So it's the opposite of selective. Compared to the testosterone receptor, it's actually much more selective than the estrogen receptor, which leads us to believe that that's why you hear so much about xenoestrogens, but not so much about xenotestosterones. And that's because of the promiscuity of the estrogen receptor. Then scientists also say that this receptor is highly conserved among all animal taxa. So what they mean is, if you think back to the original ancestral organism that first evolved a vertebrae, and if you think about all the other species that came after this ancestral organism that evolved that also have a vertebrae, so basically all the frogs, all the fish, all the birds, like all of these groups of animals, they with the vertebrae, they also have the estrogen receptor. So this is a huge cross-species vulnerability that we all share, right? Like, um, and to me, it's beautiful and horrible all at the same time. So, so what do we do about this, right? Like, what do we do about this alienation that's happening to all bodies, right? Not just a human. So there's many terms that I would use to describe this practice, but the phrase I like the most is public amateurism. And this is actually a phrase that was coined by Claire Pentecost, who is an artist and also a writer. And she describes it as the process of learning and doing and failing in the public sphere and removing the hierarchy of the layperson and the expert. So I really love this way of working because I actually find it inherently political because we're choosing to produce knowledge outside of institutions and outside of the norm, outside of the status quo. And I have to say that in these hacking moments, a lot of the knowledge that is produced is experiential. You know, it's not something that is easily recorded as data in the way that laboratories or scientists would do it. But for me, the experiential knowledge is just as valid as what you would see in the laboratory. So I think this is very, very critical to think about how far we can take knowledge production outside of institutions through this way of hacking. So I'm just going to run through a couple of early protocols from open source estrogen. So this is the yeast biosensors, which I call yes, her yeast biosensors. So yes stands for yeast estrogen sensor, and her stands for human estrogen receptor. So these are freak yeast, basically. They are transgenic. the way that I came to these biosensors was actually by accident, through a friend, Joe Zahner, who told me, like, hey, Mary, did you know that you can buy the plasmid for human estrogen receptor on Adgene, which is a DNA repository online, and you can insert it into yeast and it connects to the LAC-Z expression system. So you actually have a yellow color change in the presence of hormones. So this blew my mind. So I was like, okay, I have to try this. So I actually did this experiment when I was still doing my master's at MIT. So I was really fortunate to have access to a laboratory to perform this transformation. When I mean transformation, I mean when you insert the plasmid into the yeast. So in this picture, you see the yeast at the top, and on the bottom, you can see the yellow color change because I've exposed them to estradiol, which is a pure form of estrogen. So yeah, they worked. And then for some years, I actually I was traveling around and with the mobile lab, and let me see if I have a picture. Yeah, with the mobile lab and performing this bioassay, that's what they call it, this detection protocol out of a suitcase laboratory. Then moving on from the yeast, and I just want to say, bringing it back to this existential knowing, this was actually the first time I could really visualize the molecular semiosis that's happening between the estrogen receptor and any estrogenic molecule. When I mean semiosis, what I mean is the communication, right? The binding of the substrate into the receptor. This is a form of communication that happens at the molecular level, and the yeast allowed me to visualize it. So this was um, really mind-blowing for me. Then afterwards, I thought, okay, I want to expand the protocol further by allowing me to diagnose bodies of water. Um, So I call this practice river gynecology because we're literally diagnosing the river or bodies of water for toxicities. So this is a pretty simple hack where I have a series of peristaltic pumps that automate the process of pumping the sample through the C18 filters, which is in the image in the middle. And these filters are already designed to trap environmental toxicities. Moving on further, this protocol is actually a DIY column chromatography method that was developed in a joint residency I did with the Transhack Feminists in Spain. And it was part of a residency called Interactivos at Media Lab Prado, which doesn't exist anymore. I think they got absorbed by the Matadero. But basically, this is a great method that I use for urine because, as we know, we expel a lot of hormones through the urine. And especially if you're on some kind of hormone therapy, then you expel a lot more. Or if you're pregnant, then obviously you have a lot more in your urine. But this method is super simple. It uses silica gel and cigarette filters to create this non-polar slash polar environment that really attracts the hormones. And then you simply elute what's trapped in the bottle using methanol. So methanol is it's listed as the most effective solvent for urinary hormones, or actually any steroidal molecule in general. So um, this method is very non-selective. So what we're trapping in the urine is actually all steroidal molecules. So that includes um, testosterone, progesterone, stress hormones, melatonin, caffeine, if you had coffee in the morning. So it's a really it's a very accessible and easy to do protocol. Like you can do this in your own kitchen. And here are the results of the extraction. So this is after the methanol has fully evaporated And what's left behind are, this brown sticky substance in the tube, which is the hormones. And I really like to do this smell exercise with the participants in the workshop. And we go around smelling each other's hormones. And it's very intimate. And the really interesting thing is that everyone's nose is different. Like we all have a unique nose, and that's why smell is the least understood out of all the five senses. And so we're all smelling the same sample, and some people smell something sweet, some people smell something disgusting, and some people don't like just don't smell anything at all. And that's because our unique noses are recognizing different molecules or no molecules at all. So I always find that very interesting, how subjective smell is and how subjective our reactions to these molecules is. And then I adapted this protocol into a speculative fiction film called Housewives Making Drugs. So it was really important for me to do some of the world making around this biohacking protocol because I didn't want it to exist only as a purely scientific thing because that's impossible, right? Whatever happens in the laboratory eventually takes a life of its own when you practice it in the material world. So um, through this urine protocol, I started to speculate on, who would benefit from this protocol? How would it be used? And so this is one kind of, it's a kitchen show satire where trans women are sharing the protocol with the audience at home and cooking up estrogen in the kitchen. So there's a lot of like funny, witty banter about like heteronormativity and like the patriarchy and uses a lot of humor. So I definitely recommend you to check it out. And then here are the labs. So the lab on the right is the biosensor lab, the detection lab. And then the one on the left is the extraction lab. So you have the column chromatography setup next to the solid phase extraction with the peristaltic pumps. And then here is kind of a collage of images of how the workshops typically look like. And as you can see, it's super messy. It's really embracing the mess of biology, which is, it's such a paradox that we study biology in such controlled conditions because actually it's very chaotic and it's constantly creating new recombinations and it's constantly mutating. And I see it very much like a jam session. Like even with the participants, even if they're coming in with zero knowledge, they are still bringing something to the table, and it becomes this like this flow, this jam session where we really don't know what's going to happen. But that's the beauty of the experiment. And then it took me a couple years. It took me like 3 or 4 years after starting Open Source Estrogen to write this 6-point plan for hormone queering resistance. And I'm not going to read everything, but I'm just going to summarize. So the first 3 points are pretty straightforward, building public understanding for the xeno forces at play, demystifying hormonal knowledge and paving way for amateur exploration. Number 3, resisting the profiteering of non-consenting bodies. So that's all pretty straightforward, very hacktivist thinking. And then when we get to 4, 5, and 6, that's where it starts to get more into xeno-feminist territory, in my opinion, because we're talking about rejecting these glorifications of the natural and the unnatural, right? Because we have to reject these things first before we can build our new definitions. Using queering as a reclaimed potential, right? Embracing the multiverse of possibilities And then number 6, I want to highlight because it's asking us to consider the hormones not just agents of colonization, but also agents of collaboration, right? So it's taking away the panic and the fear, and it's saying like, hey, like we're all in this co-productive process. These molecules shape us as much as we shape them. The earth, right? The earth, even though it's polluted like crazy, it's still theorizing, right? It's trying to figure out like, what can I make from this? So we're in the process, right? And it's not catastrophic. Which leads me to the next point, which is how do we live, act, and care in a permanently polluted world? So part 2, alien tendencies I wish to no longer hide. So in 2016, this very interesting article was published where the scientists, they were trying to hybridize a species of freshwater fish, and they accidentally created a hermaphrodite in the process. And in the title of the paper, they called this fish a hopeful monster because it has both ovaries and testicles, so it can actually self-reproduce if it's unable to find a mate. And this got me thinking, well, what about our bodies that are constantly altering, constantly changing, and impure, right? Because we're all exposed to toxicities and there's no escape from it. But why can't we also view our bodies as hopeful, even though they're monstrous? Because when I was doing my research on open source estrogen, I was getting really deep into the public discourse. And I often came across articles like this, where this blogger, I'm just going to summarize, he's basically writing, I don't think it's right that there are birth control pills in the water supply because it's making all the men gay. And we need both men and women to propagate the human species. And maybe we should talk about this instead of talking about foreigners crossing our borders. So this was really like a revelation to me because I realized that, there's homophobia, transphobia, and even xenophobia all in the same article that's talking about toxicities. And it made me realize that it's such a slippery slope that the panic creates, where we feed into the fear and it becomes very like shameful and discriminatory, and it's like, no, 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 we cannot have this at all, but for the wrong reasons. So because when we think about, you know, how, if we allow fear to drive us, this is the result that we get. For example, we have a medical practice that is accepted in the US still, where if an infant is born in the hospital with ambiguous genitalia, the doctor will perform a surgery to make the child either female or male. And it's based off of these very minute measurements where a clitoris has to be between 0 and 1 centimeters. A penis has to be between 2.5 and 4.5 centimeters. And everything in between is unacceptable and requires surgery. And it made me wonder, well, who determined these numbers, right? Who gets to decide what are the parameters of normativity? And who is being excluded from these parameters? Because whoever gets excluded undergoes this violent process of being othered, right? And this image right here is actually, it seems like I'm jumping to a new image all of a sudden, but they're actually really related in my opinion, because what we're doing here is we're drawing another binary between the trash and what is clean, right? Um, Oftentimes when we see an image like this, we're like, oh, that's great. They're like cleaning up the trash. And we don't really ask ourselves where that trash is going because it's probably going into a landfill. And for me, like I see this politics of determining what deserves to be clean and what deserves to be dirty, right? Like all these places where we've set up landfills, someone in power just decided, okay, that's like a designated spot that we can just put all pollution into, right? And we don't really think that, every time you clean something, you're actually just making something else dirty. So how can we create strategies that are not just sliding back into the politics of purity, and which is basically reinforcing this binary system. Um, it's the same as the gender binary, the nature culture binary. I mean, these are all they're very similar, and the reason why they're all very similar is because they're all part of the same colonial project. It gets very, very deep, historically very deep, very entrenched notions of normativity. So um, I started to think, well, how can we tackle not just the first trauma, which is the pollution trauma, toxicity trauma, but how do we tackle the second trauma, which is the emotional trauma, the immaterial trauma, right? So we have the material and the immaterial trauma. How can we address both? That's when I started to explore more performative strategies. So through the Aliens in Green, which is a tactical theater collective, I started to experiment with more embodied strategies where we're allowing the participants to arrive at their own subjectivities of how they feel about, inhabiting an alienated body in an alienated landscape. Um, we're allowing them to come to a conclusion on their own, which is not prescribed. We're not telling them how to feel. And I think that's super important when we're dealing with feelings of insecurity and like the feeling that your body has been stolen. We run these super long and highly orchestrated workshop performances that can go on up to 8 hours or 10 hours in one day. And we work with 25 different participants and we give them all kinds of tasks without really any explanation. We give them role-playing games and we go through this very theatrical setup so that finally at the end, the hope is that they've come to some form of neutrality, some kind of, I mean, not to say neutrality, but that their fear has been neutralized. And then it was from working with the aliens in green that I started to adopt these same strategies into my biohacking workshops. So my biohacking workshops started to look more like performances. So this is the Molecular Queering Agency. And we are acting as representatives representatives of the agency, but we're also a bit like a cult. Like we are worshiping the urine in a very culty kind of way. We are performing the urine hormone extraction, but they don't really know what they're doing. Like I just asked them to follow my movements. These are just people who answered an open call. I've never met them before. They never met me. I just asked them to put on these uniforms and to follow what I'm doing. I also asked them to give me their urine. So everyone is holding a glass of urine. And we go and we do these exercises or like these body movements that are coming from kinesiology, breath work, yoga. These are all exercises that are designed to target and release trauma from the body. I was doing a lot of research on like even military exercises for people with PTSD and how they release trauma from the body. Um, and doing this in conjunction with the hormones is really interesting because um, I was speculating that the way microplastics gets trapped in the body um, is probably not too, dissimilar from the way trauma is stuck in the body. So I wanted to find a way to again like address that double trauma and release them both at the same time. And then afterwards, we go through, an hour of discussion where we process everything together. So, yeah, it's a super unique experience. And I just want to note that, we all wear these oxygen masks that are connected to hormones. And by putting on the masks, we are actually consenting to being colonized because every inhale, you're inhaling what's inside the tubes, which are foreign molecules. And this is a really interesting strategy because we are never asked if we want to be in this world. Toxicity is never consensual. We're kind of just born here and it's already toxic. And I find it interesting to have this intentional consensual moment where we're saying like, okay, yeah, I will put on these masks and I consent to being more alien. So this is what I call a three-step process for living in an increasingly queer world. So this is kind of where the dramaturgy comes in, where I've divided up Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And we have to go through these three steps in order to neutralize the fear. So step 1, toxicities. You live in an alien landscape that is colonized by hormones. Step 2, semiosis. You are already alien. You have plastics in your blood and in your urine and in your fat tissues. Step 3, subjectivities. Do you want to be more alien than you already are? So this is where you can ultimately decide how you want to be in this world. I started to call this my artist toolkit because every time I'm doing a workshop or a presentation or performance, I actually always revert back to this script where even the talk I'm giving right now in this very moment, I am going through this three-step process. And if you haven't already noticed, we are on step 2. I'm saying we're already alien, like we don't have to be scared. So that leads me to part 3, which is the genesis of caressing oceans. So let's recap for a second. So we started with the biohacking, where we produced this existential knowing. We've been able to see and smell and sense invisible molecules that we were previously unable to see or perceive, right? We're able to see the molecular, right? And the molecular semiosis, right? That's the existential knowing. And then it's like, okay, well, but then how do we deal with the immaterial, the emotional, the fear and the panic, right? Because it's very much connected to how we want to be in this world. And um, now we're starting to accept this porosity of our bodies, the porosity that allows all of this mutation and change and alienation to happen. And it's very much part of us. It's not something other or external that we can just wash away. So I started this one particular workshop format called Performing the Sublime Sea of Co-Mattering, which is the title of this talk. This started in last year in Lisbon, Portugal, where I was invited to do a workshop with Odette, an artist and performer. And we arrived at this toxic site where we asked participants to scavenge for whatever they find interesting. Um, this scavenging process, when I look back on it, it's very much connected to um, Jane Bennett's writing on the vibrancy of matter, and how when you look at any object, right? I'm holding my wallet right now. Every object has this aura. It has an energy coming out of it. Every object feels different. It has an aura coming out. And sometimes we feel attracted to this aura, right? Like sometimes we feel attracted, like, oh, I want to pick this up. It's very shiny. And Jane Bennett is talking about how the matter itself has its own agency. Like it has the ability to draw us to it. It's not just this passive thing that's not alive. It's very much alive. This is very much alive. So we're practicing this when we're scavenging, and we're actually going to scavenge in the workshop on Sunday. So we're practicing the seeability, like of the aura of the object when we scavenge, right? Like I always tell participants, like, please pay attention to the aura of the objects, um, to the allure, like what is attracting you. We bring the objects back to the venue and we do a blind sensing exercise. So the allure, the aura that drew you in, it happened optically, right? It happened through seeing. But now we take away the eyesight and we do a non-ocular sensing. So we're basically using hearing as a form of touching, as a form of tasting, and as a form of smelling. We're trying to exercise all of these untrained senses because we're such an ocular focused society and being, right? Like so much of Western cosmology is based on what you can see. And even Donna Haraway talks about this God trick that you only believe it when you see it. But what about other forms of knowledging? Like what about like using touch and using hearing? Like this is also valid forms of knowledge production. And I'm asking people to exercise this with the materials that they found so alluring. Then from this alien knowledging practice, then I asked them to build a scenography out of the materials. So this is where we are literally world making on a collective level. We are literally building out of the ruins, building out of stuff that we threw away, like trash, discarded objects, and saying, no, this object has a place here. I have a place here, and I can construct it, and I can construct it with other people around me, and we can all negotiate our various visions together. So I find this process super liberating because you're throwing away your preconceptions of what is dirty, what is waste, what is alien, what is disgusting. You're throwing that away and you're saying, no, there is an allure, there's a vibrancy, there's a value, and we're all in this co-productive moment together. And that's why, like, that's why the talk is called Performing the Sublime Sea of Co-Mattering, because in this workshop, we are performing the dramaturgy of the molecules being in co-production with us. And here's an image of the final installation that we made. And I've done this workshop many times now, and it always the scenography that we create, it always tends to resemble a home or a garden or a shrine. Um, and it makes me come to the conclusion that in some ways we all try to find a sense of belonging in alien territory. I think that's like the most instinctual human drive is to find a sense of belonging. So, what is stopping us? Why allow fear to stop us? So this is the same workshop again. I'm just going to show another example. We did it in Lithuania during the Rupert residency, which is a fantastic program for emerging artists. So we did this at an abandoned sewing factory. So this is the amount of waste, right? Like it's so much trash, no longer used. And we did the blind sensing. We did the scenography building. Um, in this exercise, I actually asked the participants not to speak. So we do this all in silence. And um, I had a really interesting discussion where we realized that when we are not speaking, we are actually speaking the same language through our bodies. Our bodies have a universal language. And this is something that they teach also in kinesiology, that the body doesn't recognize language, it only recognizes the intention of what you're trying to communicate. So here we are, just making decisions based on the intentionality of our bodies. And it's the universal language. And if we were speaking to each other, we would probably not get anything done. And then I also have to mention that we do also the urine hormone extraction. We actually embed it into the scenography because I like to just recall, Karen Barad's how the instruments cut through the web of entanglements, and the urine extraction columns, the column chromatography columns are actually the instruments that we use to slice the entanglements so that we can observe. So every time we extract our urine, we're actually capturing a um, like a snapshot of our bodies in that specific moment when you pee, and the next time you pee, your body could be completely different. And that's the permeability there in action. Like we're so porous and we're so permeable that you can really only take a snapshot, right? You can only make one slice of this complex web of entanglements, and it's super subjective. Um, it's the opposite of objectivity. There is no objectivity in science. Sorry, science. So that's why I still ask the participants to make the urine hormone extraction and embed it into their scenography, because um, we're literally slicing through the scenography that we've just created. Um, yeah, and then this is really funny. So um, this workshop that I just showed you typically takes 2 or 3 days. This version right here was done in Vienna, and they asked me to do it in 2 hours. So obviously we could not have time to go to a toxic site and scavenge. So what I asked the organizers to do is just to bring me a bunch of trash, and from this trash, I asked the participants to simulate catastrophe. So the first thing we did was we destroyed everything, and it only took us 5 minutes, and everything was in pieces. Then afterwards, we did the blind sensing. And then from there, we did the scenography building. So we're actually at the end of the talk now. I'm not sure if you guys can hear the audio. Um, but basically, we always end the workshop in some form of performance because I always like to see how the participants, like how they want to be in this new world that they've constructed. Because it's a shame to like construct everything and just like tear it down. So I always allow participants a moment in their new world before we tear it down. So here's just a video of what they decided to do in their last 15 minutes of paradise. And actually more destruction happened during this performance. Um, but yeah, that is the end of the talk. And I will happily take questions now.
Well, thank you so much, Mary, for this amazing lecture, this rich lecture with so many food for thought. Oh my God. And yeah, we have already a lot of questions and comments in the chat. We will get there in a little while. I have certain terms I noted and certain moments I'd like to go into more. Very fascinating to see that development of workshopology in your artistic research and practice, Mary. I remember in the 2017 Non-Human Agents Conference, you were studying in your abstract actually with our world is an alien landscape filled with toxicities. So I see here a lot of, and that was 2017, and I see here a lot of red threads. And in terminologies that you even also, I think you even are capable to actually dismantle terminologies to actually even alienate it in the constructive way. I'm very impressed now that after hearing the lecture tonight, I understand that uh, there are so many binaries actually now to hack. Not only the gender binary, not only nature culture binaries. Wow, there's so much to do. But let me get to the points because we all obviously have so much to ask, Mary. Alienation, this term is amazing because I see here there's alien in it. It's a sort of a process, alienation, and I combine it closely to your workshopologist practice. So if I understood correctly, that's my what I can take from many things from tonight is that you have that you want to break to reconstruct basically. It's a little bit like terms or Lola.
We
It's
have a guest.
hi Lola, hello. It's oh wonderful. It's
Okay, I'll be with you soon, okay? See you later. Sorry.
oh no, it's not sorry at all. That's exactly the permeability we want, right? Actually, it's also this binary we want to break, right? Public and private, on and off,
Yes.
here and there, artist or private person. I mean, not that I want you to break all borders, but I had a lot of food for thought tonight about breaking binaries. But maybe we can elaborate a little bit more into this alienation, because this is it's not only for the a scientific process you'd like to hack, but this is also for, I guess, a performative imperative that you offer us in your projects, and you invite us to take part in the workshops with you. So maybe can you tell me a little bit more how you implement alienation in the workshops?
So alienation, it's typically seen as something negative or something that you want to get away from because it's so foreign and it makes you uncomfortable and it makes you uneasy. But coming from, xeno-feminist thinking, alienation is actually the stuff with which we can build our new futures. So it's like, we shouldn't shy away from it, but we should actually approach it and become intimate with it and smell it and sense it and see that the alien that we see in front of us is actually already in us. We are the alien. Um, it's it's connected to a lot of trauma work, actually, because in trauma work you're always taught to look into your shadow side and integrate it into your whole being. And it's really similar to that. It's like, what if we took the trash and the toxicities? I mean, whenever I say toxicities, I actually mean it in quotations because naming a toxicity is actually a process of naming the other. So I'm always thinking, what if we took all of these like toxicities and looked at them and treated them as if they were like a shadow side of ourselves and saw them as like a mirror of ourselves in our own society. And what if we said to ourselves, like, let's incorporate this? I'm not saying that we should all like just drink a bunch of like wastewater or whatever. Like, I'm not encouraging that at all. It's more about thinking of ourselves as entangled and complicit in all of these relations, right? All of these, even if, I'm sitting in Vienna and it's a super clean city and we have super clean drinking water, I'm still complicit in another land's pollution. I'm still complicit in another person's trash. So, yeah, I guess that's what I mean. And that only comes by first acknowledging and accepting the alienation.
Mhm. Then, actually, before Chris, I hand you over, let me just ask you more about the format of the workshop. I mean, this is such an integral format. I see this more than ever tonight after the lecture. I have this feeling it's like the workshopology is the center of your artistic practice. And that comes along with making together, sticking together. We're in this trouble together, and you offer this to us. And there is so much sharing in this. This is really beautiful. And I was thinking, how can we determine more this workshop format in also in your case? So I see there's amazing lot of mobility in it. You basically break geographical binaries to be omni-mobile, and the lab in the suitcase is a fantastic moment how you share and care and visit and invite. And then I see there is a big moment of embodiment, especially with the last workshop that you shared with us. And the title of our talk tonight is a lot of body work, like a metamorphosis going on, a collective metamorphosis. Yeah? So it's experimental, it's free fly. The outcome is intentionally not planned. I think you like playing with that as well. You have a
Yes.
structure, but you're curious what the space and the people will bring.
It goes back to that jam session idea, just like we're all just coming with, our own contributions and our own knowledges, right? And we start playing a song, and it's just completely improvisational, and we have no idea what emerges on the other side. And I take this a lot from a lot of the gatherings I attended in the Hacteria network, where we all just coming with a different background, different cultural background, technical background, et cetera, et cetera. and we just create something completely unique and new. And yeah, we are world making in the process. We really are. Um, and I like to work in this space of unknowingness because it requires a lot of trust. And trust is really the antidote of panic. Um, so when we work in the space of unknowingness, we have to rely on trust, trust in ourselves, trust in our fellow participants, and trust in our materials and our environment, So, yeah, and a lot of that trust is it comes through this like embodied way of working. I can't just tell you like, hey, have trust, like it has to come through um yeah, like bringing these theories and concepts back into the body. I think it's super important.
Yeah, I was looking through this talk, and I was seeing this kind of the way you're rejecting and bursting these modernist myths, these hierarchies like the expert versus the lay, the pure versus the polluted, the normal versus the unnatural, the ocular versus the non-ocular. And I mean, when it comes down to it, like you're doing when you're doing a kind of DIY biology, you're doing this so-called freak science. And one of the things you're saying is you were also calling out science is myth of objectivity, this kind of God trick, as Haraway would have called it in her essay "Situated Knowledge." And I was just wondering what you thought would be the role of non-scientists, maybe artists or DIY practitioners, in both doing bursting that myth of objectivity, but also taking science, what it would be the science of the future. You talk about a freak science, you talk about, but what would be when the modernist myth is, falling apart, what comes after? In the year of science, and what role does DIY science or other or similar things have to do with it?
So I think that the role of the untrained and the non-specialist should be um, that they can make fictions of their own, because what science is doing is labeled as objective and it's labeled as truth, but it's just another form of fiction making. In my opinion, people can argue against that. It's fine. But you can take any set of data points and you can make a narrative out of it. And a lot of science has been weaponized in that way. Um, there have been tons of examples of very biased science where they have an agenda of saying, like for example, like this race is smarter than this race, or this race is superior than the other race, just to give a very general example. Or even the metrics that were created to define gender normativity. So we can see that, there is no objective truth that science brings. It's always there's a gender and there's an agenda and there's a narrative behind it. And when you remove or when you break down the walls of science and you allow this amateur exploration and this DIY way of making and knowledge production, we are doing this world making process, and it comes from the existential knowing, and we are constructing our own narratives, and that's super powerful because it's saying, yes, we can divest from the authority of science. We can divest from what is this like objective truth, and we can make our own stories and our own ways of being. So it's saying I don't have to buy into um the the panic and the fear that's saying like, oh, my body is not normal. I can just say for myself um how I want to exist in this world. Again, like it goes back to the question, how do we live, care, and act in a permanently polluted world? And obviously the current strategies of saying of like, doomsday and all this kind of stuff is obviously not working. It's the reason why we're deciding to colonize outer space rather than saving the planet we're currently living on. So, yeah, fiction making, everyone can do it.
That's amazing. Mary, it must be also exciting for you if you have a certain workshop mode and you repeat it in different places and with different people. So it nurtures also your.
Mhm. He has to go to bed soon, actually, but sorry.
Oh, it's already at bed. Yeah, this
please
is
continue.
the way of double work. Yeah. No, I was just curious, Mary, if you could share with us if it must be really exciting that when you repeat in different places with different groups, similar structure. So how much can you nurture from the feedback, or is it nurturing directly in new artistic practice?
Feedback, you mean from the participants?
Yeah.
Well, whenever I do these workshops, it seems like I'm giving a lot to the participants, but I'm actually gaining so much in the process, because the workshopology is my research methodology. And after every workshop, I always think about new strategies that I can do for the next workshop. And what's great about doing the workshop multiple times is that each time I'm doing it, it's in a different context, it's in a different environment, it's with a different audience. So I'm gaining so much information in the process, and I'm noticing how they feel, like what kinds of emotions are they carrying. So it's a super important process for me as an artist to do these workshops, multiple iterations of the same workshop, especially.
I guess you also wear many hats in that way. As you become a sociologist, of an observer, you become a dramaturg, you become that's amazing. Also, like to switch into the roles. It's basically also like alienating the classic artistic role of producing and presenting, right?
Yes, for sure. And also, especially when we're doing the scenography building, the installation is like a super intricate artwork, but it's co-authored. It's made collectively, and that's also really unsettling for the traditional artist model of like the singular artist made this, but it's like, no, it was made by collective bodies. And in this sense, like, I was only acting as a facilitator. I wasn't really the artist of this installation.
Amazing. Maybe I'll go over to the questions of the audience, because there's also a lot of feedback. And so Nathalie Dubois Calero would like to ask if you maybe could share some protocols, or maybe they're accessible.
Like the open source estrogen.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was during that part of the talk.
Yep.
Yeah, actually, a lot of it is documented on my website. See if I can find a quick link.
Mm-hmm.
Another way that I like to document is through fanzine making. So I have a lot of fanzines, some made only by myself and some made collaboratively, that mix in science with theory and yeah, just like remixing different schools of thought. So it's not purely scientific. Let's see. So if you go to EstroFemLab on my website, you will find all the protocols in the bottom. So I can paste that here
Wonderful.
in the
Then maybe
chat. Mhm.
I can also like take that website and I will put it in the YouTube chat. I maneuver that here for Natalie. Yeah. Wonderful. So here, Natalie. And then from Kathy. Hi, Kathy. Kathy Hi is writing. Thank you for sharing your work and thoughts, Mary. These linkages you draw out are super important and help give us language to discuss environmental changes and the emotions that these bring up for us. And Kathy writes and asks, how have you seen your work and the issues you are addressing change over time as climate crisis trauma increases? And how do you see this all going into the future?
So I see the discourse evolving actually, because when I first started Open Source Estrogen, even I was having like an internal struggle of like, should I accept the toxicities in my body? Should I accept that, this is because in the end it's inescapable, and there's really no way to reinforce this like eco purity kind of like return the planet back to its original state. Like it's just not possible, and there has to be another strategy. And I see the discourse, especially feminist discourse, evolving a lot since 2015, which is when I started Open Source Estrogen. And I feel that a lot of it is bringing in that xeno-feminist, like, all right, like we need to build out of the alienation instead of just throw it away or clean it up. And especially when I read into the texts and the works of Alexis Shotwell, she has a fantastic book called Against Purity, and it really tied in a lot of the messaging that we need right now about the fantasy or like the delusion of like being these sovereign bodies, right? Being these like these closed systems or fixed systems. Like I'm just like a fixed body and nothing enters and nothing comes out. It's really just a fantasy, and this fantasy got even deeper during the pandemic because we all wanted to barricade ourselves from the outside world. We all wanted to be as pure as possible. So yeah, I definitely see a lot of the thinking evolve, and a lot of it is because of feminist thinking.
And then Kathy also wrote, are you anticipating particular changes that might dramatically affect your script?
I don't know. I think the main thing that always changes for me is the strategies. Yeah. I think my script, like the three-step process, um, I don't know what would be like step 4. Like I don't know what would come after subjectivities, but that's very interesting to think about. Um, but definitely I'm always exploring new strategies. Actually, on Sunday, we're working with stickiness, and I didn't even mention it in my talk. But because it's so new, it's such a new strategy that I just started working with. Because I always use fluidity and like hydrofeminism. That kind of thinking has always informed my work. But now I'm thinking about viscosity, about slow, sticky, contaminating. It's very rebellious, very disobedient way of thinking about entanglements, but it's related to complicity. It's related to like sticking with the trouble and sticking with the emotions too. So this is like kind of a new framework for me.
Then also Natalie Dubois Calero was writing, we're co-involving with the trash and chemicals inside our human bubbles. And that's great as you show it. And non-humans have to co-evolve also with our human products. Are they happy of that?
It's hard to say if the non-humans are happy with us. But I would suspect that they are also trying to find their way. They are also theorizing, and they are also dealing with the recombinations and the mutations, and it's all part of this adaptive process. But not to say that we shouldn't have empathy for their process. You know, we should certainly have empathy for the becoming. That's what I call it. And for certain bodies, the timeline is very long. For other bodies, the timeline is very short. You know, we already see species of bacteria and fungi that are adapting to polluted conditions, whereas maybe, you know, a mammal species would have a longer timeline and like a longer process to really adapt. But we also have to question ourselves, like, what does it mean, or what does adapted mean? You know, like, what does survival look like? You know, because there is no right or wrong way to survive something. So yeah. Actually, I like that idea of like expanding our notions of survivability or recovery, right? Yeah, like expanding our definitions of recovery. Yeah.
I mean, you sort of think the non-subjective, the non-human subjectivity always with the, I think of the river Chode is a very perspective from a river. So I think the non-human perspective is always part of the projects. And then here writes Dolores, what part of the alienation, part of belonging? I guess you already touched that. So the part of alienation is closely connected to the moment of belonging.
I would say so, because if you ask me what defines an alien, I think an alien is anything or anyone that is searching for a home. And I wouldn't place alienation and belonging on two sides of a spectrum per se, but I would say that they are very much an entangled process that's kind of informing each other, if that makes sense. Are you sleepy? You want to go to sleep? No, you want to stay up.
Yeah. Part of the party. It's know exactly where the attention goes. Of course. Hi, Lola. I have a wonderful commentary and also a question here from our dear colleague Eva. Eva is part of the Art Lab team, and I'd like to read this to you, Mary.
Okay, I'll be there soon. Is it okay if we make this the last question?
Sure. So Eva's writing, thank you so much for this eye-opening presentation. Xeno-feminist technological practices can be gender abolitionist, but do you think they can articulate as well when it comes to race and class?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Because racism, sexism, classism, it's all like this process of creating these categories. And through categories, that's where you are actually defining what is the other, what is not you, right? The not self, right? And so for sure, these strategies, these xeno-feminist strategies, like they don't just apply to the planetary or climate emergencies, but it bleeds into everything. Everything is intersecting actually. Because as I said before, like all of these binary structures that are imprisoning us, they all come from the same colonial project. And yeah, like all of these inequalities that we see, like they all stem from the same source. So yeah, for sure.
So actually, it really reminds me on the Kubonik's manifesto of xenofeminism. Actually, 8 years ago, when it says a feminism of unprecedented cunning, scale, and vision. I mean, we are really there, right? I mean, under different conditions, of course, in a post-pandemic condition, different geopolitical situation, different biopolitical situation, but what we can definitely say to maybe also come to the end of our beautiful lecture and discussion, dear Mary, that you're activating, embracing embodied artistic practice is contributing a lot to sticking with the trouble and to find ways to embrace both knowledge production, but then also non-linguistic experience, as you emphasized also in one workshop that you said, it's we are silent and we are feeling and we're sensing, and this is a very important territory. I would even say it's a field where you lead the participants in the workshops, and actually that you all allows to go beyond human categories as language and systematics. So, well, so thank you very much, everyone, for commenting and questioning. I hope I didn't leave out a question. And thank you so much, Mary, for being with us and
thank you for
with us
moderating
tonight from Vienna.
And very much looking forward to having the workshop with you at the weekend.
Yes, I'm excited as well. Yeah.
Yes. So the workshop is booked out. If anyone is interested, I'm sorry, it's booked out. We have a waiting list if you really want to be adamant and ask us to put your name on the waiting list. And so what we can say here for the end, we have Sticking with the Trouble on Sunday, the workshop. We will definitely also share in one way or the other, outcomes and results. What we can say with big pleasure that this lecture tonight is recorded as we're talking here, and it will be staying in the Art Lab archive and is, of course, shareable and distributable to everyone's likings. And yeah, so Mary, thank you for being with us, and happy to see you in person on the weekend.
Yes, I'm excited. Thank you so much. And yeah, I wish all of you a great evening. See
Thank
you.
you,
Ciao,
audience.
ciao.
Speak soon.
Bye.
Oh, that was